Hello and welcome to Straight Talk with me, Sifiso Mahlangu. Tonight I bring you the former CEO of Eskom, Mr. Mr Molefe. No questions barred tonight. We go into the state capture debate. What really happened with Thuli Madonsela's state of capture report? What happened when Mr. Molefe left Eskom, went to Parliament and returned to Eskom? This is ANN7. I am Sifiso Mahlangu. Do not move. The state capture inquiry has just begun. Mr. Molefe, I welcome you to the show.
Thank you very much.
I've tried to get you here many times before. The last time you held a media conference or you addressed anyone on camera was when you spoke for the last time at Eskom and you ended up in tears.
I didn't realize that it has been it's exactly 1 year ago.
Exactly a year ago, in fact. I've tried to get you here before. But what really happened that day? You spoke about the allegations leveled against you by many South Africans and the state of capture report by the former public protector, Ms. Thuli Madonsela.
I think when I was looking at the situation, looking at the observations or allegations that she was making without having afforded me an opportunity to respond or to proffer an explanation, and that she had published those observations, and I suddenly realized what she had done, and that it actually, what frustrated me was that it didn't really matter when and how I would respond. She had painted a picture. The picture had been painted by somebody called Mother Teresa, and so it was. It looked like she had just done a huge injustice, and there was no way of getting around it or getting justice quickly or getting my story out quickly. So it frustrated me to the point where I think maybe I became very emotional.
Did Ms. Madonsela ever investigate you? Were you ever interviewed by the former public protector?
No. She never interviewed me about the telephone calls. She never asked me about the telephone calls. She did send questions before to Eskom, which we answered, but they had nothing to do with the telephone calls. We have since investigated the telephone calls and found them to be fraught with inaccuracies, in fact, very wrong. And at the right time, I will explain how her analysis is in fact wrong. But what was interesting, I don't know what program she was using, but you must look at the date format in her report. It is month, day, year. It sort of made me suspect that she'd been getting assistance from people that use that date format, which is the Americans. So I don't know. We are still investigating this.
Ms. Madonsela possibly was assisted by a foreign agency to investigate you, perhaps such as the CIA or the FBI?
I don't know, but it is very strange that in her report, the date format is month, day, year, which is very strange because we don't use that format in South Africa.
So you never had an interview with her?
No, not on the telephone calls.
Let me understand your relationship with the Gupta family. People in this country say you were captured. Your relationship with the Gupta family was to loot SOEs. That is certainly what is suggested by the state of capture report. Maybe, Mr. Molefe, if you can give me some background on your relationship with members of the Gupta family.
Well, the state of capture report actually just says that I have made these phone calls. And I will show later that, in fact, what she said about the phone calls is not correct. But I've never had a relationship with the Gupta family to loot Eskom or Transnet or anywhere. I have never denied that I know the Guptas. And I have even said that in instances where I was involved and the Guptas were in business transaction with the SOEs that I worked, I've had no reason to say that we cannot do any business with them because they have never been blacklisted. They have never been found guilty of crime in South Africa. There is no reason in the PFMA or in the legislation to say that we should never do any business with them. So when I arrive at Eskom and they already have a coal contract, I could not cancel their coal contract. I could not disconnect their electricity because people don't like them. And I have said this in Parliament before, that our constitution unfortunately does not work like that. That if you don't like people, therefore, it means that they must be excluded from doing business with government or quasi-government organizations. As a manager, there are a lot of allegations that are going around about capture and this and this and that, but nothing has been formalized by way of a criminal conviction or blacklisting in terms of the PFMA, or any sanction has been applied to them. In fact, I don't know if they were to tender tomorrow for work at the city of Johannesburg, and their tender was to be adjudicated, and it was found objectively that they had won the tender, how Mr. Mashaba would handle it.
Let's talk about the law. If one is investigated and is found to not be guilty, you cannot deem them guilty according to the Constitution of the Republic. Even if someone has murdered or whatever the case might be, they need to be given a hearing, they need to be given an audience. It's very strange to me that your name is in the state of capture report, Mr. Molefe, but you're saying you were never interviewed by the public protector. Why did you never speak up about it?
Because I was flabbergasted to a point of paralysis.
Because that is an injustice if that is the case.
It is indeed. And this was not just done by the public protector, it was repeated. The public protector wrote these insinuations. That is what they are at best, because they are not findings. The public protector's report does not have findings. It has insinuations or observations. But after that, the Council of Churches also writes a report on state capture, drags my name into it, and never interviews me from the church. I could not understand that. The church in South Africa has always stood for justice, and I would have thought that the South African Council of Churches, or the church, would have at least said, my son, what have you done here? What is your explanation? That was also followed by a report by the academics, who also wrote the report, which is now being used by Parliament as a basis for their investigation. But the academics, led by Professor Eberhard, who was in the war room, the load shedding war room, also never interviewed me, never asked me what happened. And now Parliament is proceeding with this inquiry, and they're calling witnesses every day, and I can see that we are approaching the end of the month where Parliament will rise. I don't know if I will be called, because they have not indicated when I will be called to Parliament. So
the South African Council of Churches did not invite you for an interview?
No.
They never said, Mr. Molefe, these are the allegations
Yes.
Against you. What is your response?
No.
But they tabled the report.
They tabled the report.
The academics also tabled the report.
Yes.
And now the matter is in Parliament.
Yes.
Yet you've not been invited.
Not yet been invited, and I see that Parliament is about to rise at the end of the month. And there is no sign, indication as to when I will be called to testify.
Have you not considered writing to the Speaker of Parliament and saying, I am the gentleman that is cited. I hear my name in the corridors of Parliament. I'm a former member of Parliament myself. I demand to be heard. Why haven't you exercised that right?
Well, they have not said they will not hear us. They said they will hear us at the right time. They will eventually hear us. All I'm complaining about is when. When? Perhaps I should write a letter and say when. But they, this morning I see in the newspapers Mrs. Ranto is saying, well, we cannot confirm whether we will call him this year or next year. But I feel, you know, with your name being dragged in the mud on a daily basis in that inquiry, that there are certain things that are plainly not true that are being said. Like a member of the DA on the 30th saying that the public protector's findings. There were no findings.
You're one of the gentlemen in this country that people define as black excellence. You've turned the PIC around, and yet in 2017, 2016, you kept the lights on at Eskom. Many people called you Mr. Turnaround.
Yes.
But there was a mockery that happened. And there's no other way for me to describe it, Mr. Molefe. You are the CEO of Eskom. Then your branch in the ANC sends you to Parliament. When you get to Parliament, you're now an MP. Eskom brings you back as CEO of the state-owned enterprise. Then it rescinds that decision, and you are left to be a pensioner. How did that transaction happen?
When I joined Eskom on the 1st of October 2015 as a permanent employee, I received a letter from the minister that I'm now employed at Eskom as a permanent employee who will also serve as an executive director of Eskom. And so, and I accepted. I signed on the dotted line. I was given a contract which I signed, and I then started working as a permanent employee and a member of the Eskom pension fund, expecting that my employment is permanent, which means probably until I retire. So a month later, we get a letter from the minister that says, no, the decision has been taken that that contract must be converted to a 5-year contract. So then I raised the question, if I change my contract from a permanent one to a 5-year contract, there will be implications for my pension. And I'm concerned about my pension because I have moved from the PIC to Transnet to Eskom, and none of them were long enough for me to accumulate enough or sufficient pension. And so I was hoping that I'd stay here long enough so that in 10 or 15 years' time when I retire, my pension will be adequate to look after me for another 15 or 20 years. I don't know, people live long these days. But maybe in my case it was not necessary. So they then wrote to the minister asking for permission to have a dispensation whereby, should I decide to leave, I could apply for early retirement, and the early retirement will mean that I'm deemed to have left at 63, and pension Eskom would pay the penalties as well as the additional benefits, for the additional benefits. So that letter was sent to the minister. I'm not sure what happened there, but after that, in January, in I think January or February, the board took a resolution that that is indeed the case. And so at the end of the year, when we have had about 3 months of no load shedding, the public protector came up with a report, and I decided, well, my option is to take early retirement. And I applied for it. I applied for early retirement. I wrote
so at
the
this
letter.
point, you are considered a pensioner?
No, I'll come back to that. So I applied for early retirement. And Eskom approved my early retirement.
Okay.
And the documents were sent to the pension fund. And from January, I started receiving a pension. And then sometime in February or March, the ANC in Northwest asked me if I could represent them in the National Assembly as a member of the ANC from Northwest. And I agreed. As a pensioner, I went to Parliament. When I was there, I got communication from Eskom that said, sorry, we made a mistake. You shouldn't have gone on early retirement. So I said, that's fine, but so how do you unscramble the egg? And they said, the best thing is that you should return to Eskom. as the CEO and that we cancel your pension. I said that is fine. We signed an agreement whereby I would return. The minister was aware of it. And then I returned. 10 days later, I get another letter that says the minister has instructed us to terminate your employment. So I'm not even a pensioner now.
Okay.
So the employment was just terminated and the matter is before the court.
So that is perhaps like sabotage or betrayal by the minister. I would expect Ms. Lynn Brown to understand the process of you going to Parliament and coming back. Where does that place you now?
No, I wouldn't say so. I mean, where it places me is in between because we are now in court. And so we will have to await the outcome of the court proceedings, which will determine exactly where I'm placed.
Do you feel betrayed by the ESCOM board or the Minister Lynn Brown?
No, I don't feel bitter or betrayed. I just feel that I have a faith in the justice system in South Africa, and that in circumstances like this, it is in the courts that you must place your faith. And so we will see what happens when we go to court.
Let's talk about you keeping the lights on in 2016. It was an elective year, the local government elections, and I'm being made to understand that there were a lot of threats against you keeping the lights on at ESCOM, particularly from Glencoe. What happened there?
Well, what happened is that when I joined ESCOM, the biggest issue was load shedding. In fact, that my mission was to, simple, end load shedding. 2 words. Load shedding was an inconvenience. I had been irritated by it myself when I went to the bank one morning and I found the bank manager outside and he said there's no electricity. So when I arrived there, while we were dealing with the matter, Glencoe then asked that its contract to supply electricity at 150 Rand until 2018 must be increased to 530. And not only that, they were very close to doing a deal with ESCOM on this matter. I said, but this is ridiculous because ESCOM doesn't have the money to now enter into another contract that would prejudice itself, because we do have a contract that they will supply electricity until 2018.
So they wanted to strong arm you into another contract, effectively cancelling the former contract.
We had absolutely no reason to buy electricity, coal from Glencoe or from Optimum at 1 cent above 150. Absolutely no reason, because we had a contract until 2018 that said we should, they will supply electricity, coal at 150. On top of that, there were penalties that had been calculated that were due, that amounted to what we calculated to be 2.1 billion. And I said, these penalties are payable and we should collect, just as we are trying to collect arrears from Soweto. Why should we try to collect arrears from Soweto and not from Glencoe? And I made this known to Glencoe, and I said, it's not acceptable that we should change the contract. It's also not acceptable that you should not pay your penalty. Whereupon they said, well, Mr. Molefe, we will stop the supply of electricity. And if we do, you will have more load shedding. And I said in that meeting to Mr. Glazenberg, well, if you're putting a gun to my head, I will ask you to shoot.
At this point, why didn't you go to the Minister of Mineral Resources? I think at the time it was Mr. Ramatlodi. Why didn't you ask for the intervention? Because that would be legal.
It was not necessary because we had a contract with Glencoe that says they will supply coal at 150 Rand until 2018. And there were penalties that were calculated in terms of the contract. So we did not go to Minister Ramatlhodi at all. What was surprising is that shortly after Mr. Glazenberg had made this threat, Minister Ramatlhodi suspended Glencoe's license on his own because of retrenchments. And it is when we rushed to Minister Ramatlhodi to say to him, Minister, please don't suspend this license because we need the coal, because we have load shedding.
Okay.
So whatever happens on this retrenchments issue, please do not suspend the license. And indeed, a couple of days later, the license was given back to...
A few months ago, Mr. Ramatlhodi spoke to members of the press and said that the Eskom board and Mr. Ben Gubane put pressure on him to suspend Glencoe's license.
And he also says he refused.
He also said he refused, yes. I saw that article.
But without me having to say that Minister Ramatlhodi may be mistaken, everybody knows that at that time he did suspend Glencoe's license.
Are you saying Mr. Ramatlhodi is lying?
It was done during a press conference. No, I think maybe his memory is not serving him well, or maybe he forgot, maybe something. I wouldn't say he's lying. I respect him.
Maybe he's mathematical with the truth.
No, I respect him very much. Former Premier of Limpopo, a minister of our government, senior member of the ANC. He did not lie. But perhaps there was an error in what he was saying, because the facts are he did suspend that license. And after a couple of days, and a couple of days of us running around looking for him, asking him, please don't suspend the license, it was restored. You can check. Perhaps you have the clips from the press conference when he actually suspended the license.
So now, Mr. Molefe, you have the power back on. Your relationship with Glencoe had become very cantankerous. South Africa calls you Mr. Transformation, and your career looks to be blossoming at Eskom. Then there comes the State of Capture report. Do you think the State of Capture report was a way and a design,
by the way,
to deal with your career?
Before we get there, the license was restored, the supply of coal was restored, and a week or two later, Glencoe put the mine under judicial management. They call it rescue, business rescue these days. 48 hours later, the business rescue practitioners stopped the supply of coal to Henrina. And so we had to go and scavenge for coal and look for coal. Fortunately, we had been stockpiling since the threat had been made.
Okay.
And we went for a month of August without the supply of coal from Glencoe. Perhaps with the hope even from the business rescue practitioners that we would do load shedding and agree to increase the price. But we went for a month without a supply of coal from Glencoe until they came back and offered to resume supply under new conditions, which is that they will sell the mine. We said, it's your mine, you decide what to do with it. But they were not supplying us with coal. They, I don't know, perhaps were hoping that that will cause more load shedding. Unfortunately for them, because of our other plans in the business to stop load shedding, they were beginning to bear fruit, and we actually did not have any load shedding during the month of August.
Do you think that the State of Capture report was politically motivated?
As soon as Glencoe announces that they're selling the mine, and they have found buyers in the Guptas, State of Capture report came out. Very short report, very hurried, no findings, just insinuations.
So you're suggesting that Ms. Thuli Madonsela's report was politically motivated because as soon as the Guptas bought the mine and did so legally, the state of capture report came out. So maybe people with vested interest or people who wanted this mine unctioned Ms. Madonsela to release that report. Could that be a possibility?
I have no evidence that that is actually what happened, and I cannot begin to speculate about what was happening in the public protector's mind. I do not know what happened. I'm just saying that factually, this is what happened. A few weeks after load shedding had stopped, Glencoe was grudgingly providing us with coal at 150, and they had said they are selling the mine. Not only were they selling the mine, they would sell it to the Guptas, because there were other people that were interested in the mine. But Glencoe said, no, we will sell to Oak Bay. To which we said, it's your call. It has got nothing to do with us, really. And then the state of capture report came out with the insinuations of the telephone calls, which I will show later that in fact were not correct.
When you show these telephone calls later and Ms. Madonsela's incorrectness, as you say, will this be you fighting back, fighting for your place at Eskom,
fighting back,
fighting to clear your name?
I'm not fighting back. I'm not fighting with anyone. I'm just stating the facts as I know them.
How will you clear your name?
Well, legal advice to me has been to wait for an appropriate forum. And I've been waiting for a year for an appropriate forum. The public protector instructed the president to set up a commission of inquiry.
Yes.
An instruction which the court must now determine whether she was capable of issuing. So if she was not capable of issuing that instruction, it means that she made these insinuations and left no room to remedy the situation if it's found that in fact she's not capable of issuing that instruction to the president. So maybe the churches had an opportunity to do it by affording me an opportunity to respond to what they had and what they knew. But they were, I suppose, too much in a hurry to pursue a particular narrative, no matter, and so in the process left justice behind. The academics as well. The report that they have given to Parliament does not stand up to scholarly rigor, in my opinion. It is full of holes, and I will show, if I'm afforded an opportunity to speak to Parliament, how flawed it is. How, in fact, Parliament should focus on why the war room, of which Mr. Eberhard was a member, was not actually focused on the elimination of load shedding. In my opinion, they had been shifting the deck chairs instead of dealing or confronting the problem directly.
We're sadly out of time. Thank you for being here. And that was the former CEO of Eskom, Mr. Brian Molefe, has spoken. I am Sifiso Mahlangu. This is Straight Talk only on ANN7. So goodbye from me.